This is the
Spartan Podcast,
where we illuminate the world of parenting children with autism. I'm CJ, a proud dad to a wonderful 6-year-old with autism. Through my journey, I've discovered the challenges, triumphs, and unique experiences that come with raising a child on the spectrum. Inspired by those experiences, I created this space where parents like you can find understanding, share stories, and learn from each other. Join me as we explore insights, strategies, and support, all while celebrating the brighter spectrum of our children's lives. Now, let's dive in and cast light on this path together. Joining me today is author and teacher Gail Hugman. Coming to us from the UK, she's going to give us a unique perspective on what it's like to teach not only neurotypical kids, but being around neurodivergent children, especially children on the spectrum. I really think this is going to be great, especially since 99% of my audience is currently American. It'll give us a perspective of how some things are done, overseas and inside of different countries and cultures. So I'm hoping to have a lot of guests that come on and talk about this sort of thing. So I'm actually really grateful, and thank you so much for sitting down with me today, Gail. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to meet you. Wow.
You too. We had a little bit of a pre-conversation before starting to record, and I'm hoping to get into that. But before we really get rolling, can you just kind of introduce yourself and a little bit of your background for the audience?
Sure. Hello, everybody. I started teaching in London in 1974, and I spent 30 years teaching in and around London. And my claim to fame is 1 year in Denver, Colorado. I taught in a very small school in Boulder. And then after 30 years of teaching, I realized I didn't want to be in senior management anymore because I was seeing more and more paper and fewer children. And I had a light bulb moment where it dawned on me that in 30 years of teaching, I had not seen any improvement in children's engagement in learning. And it made me question what motivates children. And so I decided, rather than become a principal of a school, I would leave and work and research and set up a service for parents, helping them to understand what motivates primary children, because the first 12 years of life are when we build the platform or the foundation in ourselves. We create that labyrinth of connections on which we build our lives. And so I came out of teaching in schools, and I've been working for the last 20 years in children's homes until the pandemic, and then online. And now I work internationally with children and parents to help them support their learning and development. In that, obviously, there have been times in my career in schools and privately when I have had to work with neurodivergent children. And that's why I responded when Christopher was looking for people to come onto his show. So that's me. Now, I've written 3 books. The first book started as a letter to the head teacher when I told him I was leaving. And he had asked me what it was I'd do that's different. And I thought about it for some time and started to write a letter to explain that it isn't what I do, but it's how I think about children that I think makes the difference. Because I don't see children to be empty. I don't see children to come into the world as an empty thing that we need to train. I see children come into the world as the highest form of life on this planet, and because of that, they are the most sensitive, the most creative, the most intelligent form of life. And that needs educating about the culture that they are dropped into, well, not dropped into, born into. And that is where the books came about. And so the first one was the letter to the head teacher, and someone said parents need to see this. So I published it as a very small book, and it's called A Short and Simple Book for the Wise, WHY, the wise. And then after working with children in their homes and discovering what it is that children need to hear to be excellent in attitude and in application at school, I thought parents need this. They need to know how to help their children. And so my second book, which is a proper book, it's not very fat, but it's a proper sized book, is called 100 Things to Learn Before You're 10. And it is about the creation of the human connections we need to be able to engage in life, and then how to use school to help us develop. And then my third book I've published this year is to help parents understand the core drive and the core needs of each child, and using everyday activities, how to promote those with their children, so that they know what they're learning and they know to um, how to practice that to teach themselves. So that's where I hope it hasn't crackled out.
No, I had it muted. He was banging on the couch with a drumstick.
Okay. we have an
Um,
extra visitor here.
yeah, he pops up a lot throughout the episodes,
That's fine.
and I know a lot of people sometimes get put off by that sort of thing. But
Yeah,
being that the niche of this show is directed towards parents with children with autism, I feel like it gives this like authentic experience. Like this is what it's
absolutely.
like having a child with autism. You know, you don't get to just be by yourself and doing something in this perfect quiet environment. There's noise, there's stuff, they're doing something at all times.
Yeah,
And it gives this very like relatable perspective. So like if I feel like if people are able to hear that over the podcast while they're learning all this stuff and realizing that there's people out there doing the exact same stuff they are, it's sort of like cathartic, right? Where they're just like, oh,
definitely.
look at this guy can't even record a podcast without this kid in the background. So yeah, I mean that's just what life with a kid with autism is like. It's just noise constantly, and you get used to it, and you stop hearing it and stuff. But yeah, that's why he's just there
Yeah,
doing his thing.
yeah,
Um, but moving forward,
yeah.
uh, you made this transition. You wrote some of these books, and I'd really like to talk about initially like your experience with these kids and the various degrees of autism that you've seen in children, because you said that you taught pretty much everybody. And just a couple of questions, like as we dive into that, just some things to think about. Is like, is it normal? You said you were teaching out of Boulder, Colorado, and then now you're back in the UK. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm in the UK now.
Right. Okay. Um, and like, was it typical for these neurodivergent children to be put into just standard classrooms? And was there any sort of like uh, special program or anything for them? Was that something that was available at the time? Just kind of like stuff like that. And then like just the varying degrees of autism, and some of the things that you saw patterns and different methods maybe that you came up with. Because let's be honest, teachers spend more time with our kids than we do. So on top of that, it's volumes of children. It's not just one or two. So um, maybe from that perspective, maybe you have some insight on different tactics and methods for dealing with things like meltdowns or uh, stimming and sudden loudness, or maybe distraction from ADHD. And I'm just going to keep asking questions. So I'm going to just kind of go
Yes.
silent here and let you take it over.
Okay. Um, when I started my business, I mean, in the school structure, that we go as far as possible for inclusion. So I have worked in a situation in a school where there was a unit, a separate unit for the children who had any kind of difference to what might be called neurotypical normal. And if they were severe, then there would be special schools for them. And although I visited one or two, I didn't engage with those very severe children. However, there are children that live and work in schools in what might be considered a normal classroom, and they are given a special attention from what's called the SENCO, the Special Educational Needs staff. And when I came into working privately, of course, people would engage me because their child wasn't performing as they should have been in school, or wasn't achieving what they should have achieved. And so they were looking for help. And that's where I've come into much more intensive one-to-one support with families who have a child who's in what might be considered a normal school situation, but who needs a separate kind of support. And when you asked about stimming, one of the first children I met, when his mother spoke to me, she said, we cannot stop him from walking up and down. He just keeps walking up and down, and we can't get him to stay still. And he was a very clever little boy, very bright, and they had messages from school that suggested he might be on the spectrum, but he had not seen a psychologist at that point. And a number of people said that they thought he was autistic. When I met this child, because I would do an assessment of my own, when I meet every child, I do an assessment of my own, and I want to try and understand what makes this child tick, and how I can best help them. When I met this child, he did not make eye contact. He was talking nonstop. He was striding up and down, and it's a lot. It's almost overwhelming, isn't it, when you have this little bundle of life that is doing its thing, and you think this isn't gonna work in this environment for him. So how do we help this child to bring this under control? Now, obviously, as they mature, it gets easier in many ways. But with this child, what I told him when I wanted him to do, like for instance, with stimming, I've done this with other children. I will say, I want you to do your flapping or your striding or whatever it is they do. I want you to do that for 1 minute. And I have a 1 minute timer, a sand timer, because I want their brain to see the time. And then when the minute is finished, I want you to hold it still for 30 seconds. And I have another timer that is 30 seconds. And so they would think this was fun, and they would do the shaking or the striding or the whatever it was. And one child used to just race around the room. And I had to say to his mother, it's okay, we're going to bring this down, but we need to let that brain do that so that it can then stop. And when you do this kind of work, what happened with the 5-year-old with the striding, after a while, we were able to tell him he could do it in the break time, but not in his class. And so he would do that. And after a while, he brought it under control so that he could do it when it didn't annoy or get in the way of anything else he was doing. And that took several years of practice, but he managed to take charge of it in himself. And then we had another eye contact. Now,
But
I've
before we get
learned.
into that, can I ask you a follow-up question about the
Yes,
stimming real
please.
quick?
Yes, yes, please.
So there's this line of thought that and obviously there's two schools of thought behind, well, maybe three or four, but it goes back and forth when it comes to stimming that kids shouldn't have to suppress it at all. Like, it's how they refocus their minds, and low masking children should just be able to stim at will, and that should be
Mm-hmm.
tolerated. And from what it, and then I mean, there's other schools of thought. They're like, well, can be controlled, and there's no reason they can't. And sort of what you kind of described there is like you didn't tell them they couldn't, but you kind of set guidelines for when it's appropriate. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there wondering right now if when you set those guidelines, did you notice any sort of like negative developments, or was it just overtly like positive, like they responded really well to like, I'm allowed to do this, but I have rules?
Yeah. No, they. I never want to suppress something that matters to a child. What I want them to do is learn to manage it for their own protection, because it may not be appropriate in situations. And what you're trying to do is protect them from difficult situations that they can't handle because they've triggered it with something they're doing. And this child was in danger of being excluded from the school because he would keep getting up and he would keep walking about, and he couldn't help it. So parents wanted him to stay there. So yes, you can't say you can't do that. Because that's what his brain is triggering. And so you have to learn, like any neurotypical child as well, learns to take control and to manage their behavior, because you can't just get up and go out when you want to. If you're in school, you have to control that impulse. And yes, it is
Mm.
more challenging for children who are neurodivergent. It's often more challenging, but it is not impossible. And it's not, no, I remember one little boy I worked with, and I did it with him. I said, you can absolutely go crazy, because everyone's telling them, stop doing that. Everybody's saying, you mustn't do that now. You mustn't stop that, and trying to get them to stop. But I was saying, I want you to do this for one whole minute. And they usually stop halfway through and they go, oh, I'm tired. And I say, no, no, go on, keep doing it, keep doing it. And they would laugh and say, oh, but I'm tired now. No, 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 you keep going, keep going, keep going. And encourage them to keep going. And they would get a second wind and woo, and run around and then stop. And they were able to stop. And that meant you could say, that's fantastic, well done, because you did it when you were asked to, and you stopped when you were asked to. And over a period of time, sometimes the children would say, can I get up now? Can I get up now? And they'd be bursting to do that. And I'd say, okay, you've got 1 minute, keep it for 1 minute. And then you extend that time, because what you're doing is helping them to take charge of them so that they are not in distress. Because sometimes it's a reaction to stress, isn't it? And they do the stimming, the I can't control it, I can't control it. Okay, that's fine. But let's see if we can help you to take control so that you know when you can. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So it really does sound like it was like a very positive response. Like, it
Mm,
wasn't like, hey, you have to hide this. This isn't something you can
no.
do. But it sounds like you really did have a positive response towards teaching them management skills for get it out of your system, but get it out of your system at these times.
Yeah. But it's the same with children. Um, After school, there are some children who may have ADHD and autism. And ADHD, they're trying to suppress often with medication. But I use the similar techniques where I say, this is when you need to be quiet. And I'll go through the hours of the day with them. And right from midnight, because if you say to a young child, when does the day start? They'll say in the morning. And I will go right through the day. And this is information I have put into my books for parents. So I start at midnight and I say, what are you doing between midnight and 1 o'clock? And they will say, oh, I'm sleeping. And what are you doing between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock? Oh, I'm sleeping. What are you doing between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock? Oh, I'm sleeping. And I say, oh, you sleep a lot. What are you doing between 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock? And we go through and I say, do you know that at 4 o'clock when you're asleep, all the birds are waking up and they're all twittering away on the branches? And they find that fascinating. And then we go through the hours of the day and we say, this is where you need to be in control. And this is where you can be, you can do your thing. And this is where we want you back in control. So that we gradually show them that for the vast majority of the day, it's fine. It's, they need to be in control in that situation. And you're educating them then about how to be in charge of themselves. Because, yes, stimming is something that I think that adults that are autistic, I mean, I don't think we've actually recorded the fact that we discovered my husband was diagnosed with autism 15 years ago as a result of difficulties that we were having. And
Mm-hmm.
I had seen some behavior in children that I was working with at the time. And I suggested to him that he might be on the spectrum. And I thought that would be a useful thing for him to know. But it turned out to be quite a negative experience for him, because he had thought about himself in one way and then discovered it was completely different to how he thought. I mean, he's adapted to it now, but because he's been unwell, he's not able to mask anymore, and so
Mm-hmm.
we've had to make adjustments when we're talking. And it's really, I mean, it's funny how that has helped me even more with the children I work with, because I can understand better when they're in distress. You can't just say, oh, pull yourself together. It's not going to happen. It's a different wiring. And unfortunately, the world seems to see autism or any of the neurodiverse um, differences as negative. And actually, my husband has strokes of genius, which is what attracted me to him. um, if you have a problem to solve, their brains see problems in different ways, and you can get some quite fantastic solutions to difficulties with adults who are on the spectrum. So it's not all negative.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of the now I'm part of the millennial generation,
Mm.
and I would venture even to say the generation after the millennials, um and definitely all of them before it wasn't seen as a divergence. It was seen as like poor behavior, something to be
Mm.
disciplined out of you,
Mm. Mm.
and you weren't really seen as like um a child with needs. It was you were just not a good kid, right?
Yeah.
And you know there was a lot of corporal punishment going on
Yeah.
in those times, and
Yeah.
so a lot of us learned very quickly to hide those things,
Yeah.
right? So I kind of feel like maybe that's sort of what we're experiencing, especially
Yeah.
when people like your husband are finding out, well, this is actually what's going on. There's a lot of that like past trauma that like suddenly makes sense.
Yes.
And it's not fun to realize those kinds of things.
Mm.
So it's not necessarily the fact that I thought I was this, but I'm actually this. It's the realization that like
Mm.
there was nothing wrong with me the entire time.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
just this is just me. And then they got to sit there and dwell like, man, Like I was treated pretty poorly in
Yeah.
compared to what should have happened.
Yeah.
And then it's not necessarily all of our parents' fault, right? Because this wasn't something that it wasn't common. They weren't testing for it. I'm not even sure there were tests for it. I would have to research that, so don't quote me.
Mm.
Uh, but people didn't know, so that's what the perception was. It was just like I have just a really difficult, just naughty kid, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and it's kind of sad, but at the same time,
Yeah.
they get a little bit of a pass because that's just how things were at the time, right?
Absolutely, yes.
So,
And the world has changed significantly since, even since you were a child. Definitely since I
mhm,
was a child. Um, the year I was born, there were 2.25 billion people on the planet, and now there's over 8 billion people. That's a huge, huge difference.
too
So,
many.
well, when I see crowds of people, I find it quite overwhelming. To
Hmm.
see crowd, the awful thing, the Hajj, 500 people died from the heat and the crush, and you see these huge masses of people in places that are very frightening, when they're not controlling themselves and their impulses. And that's one of the core executive functions, the core executive skills that I teach first of all is self-control. And I use the little timer and say, can you do this for 1 minute or even 30 seconds if a child is really, you asked about, or you mentioned, I have to tell you this story, eye contact. Now, I have
Hmm.
learned that for children on the spectrum, telling them to look at you when you're talking to them can be difficult because it's a sensory overload. But I've learned that along the way. And to start with, I wanted to get that original little boy who was walking up and down. Um, he's at university now, by the way. I wanted to get him to make eye contact with me, and I would put my face in front of his, and I would turn his head gently, and he couldn't until one day I arrived at the home with sunglasses on, and he was searching for my eyes behind the sunglasses, and he kept on looking at my face and looking, and I thought, I've gotcha. And we made eye contact because of the sunglasses. And so I've used that since, because there's not so much sensory input if you're looking at somebody through a lens. And
Mm.
that has helped some children as well. I have another book here. I don't know if this is the right way round. Sensory Signals. I don't know if you have
Okay.
the book. It's I can send you the name. It's by somebody called Angie Voss, and this has helped me a lot because it has uh, it's packed with different behaviors, how to interpret them, and how to help children manage them. So,
Hmm.
the weighted blanket for sleep, and the
Yeah.
different the different support things you can do to help children, because it's quite overwhelming, I think, for a parent to learn that they have a neurodivergent child, and
Yeah.
it takes a bit of adapting, because the immediate thing is this is a negative experience, and actually, I don't know.
Oh, so I can only speak from my personal perspective, but
Mhm,
it wasn't a negative for me, but it was like a moment of like anxiety and panic because the only way I knew how to raise children was by taking the positive aspects of how which was 99% of my mother
mhm,
is really where I was drawing my knowledge of parenting from.
mhm,
I'm not going to get into my dad, but there's
mhm,
there was nothing positive there. But everything I knew about parenting and how to raise children, most of that knowledge came from my mother, and almost none of it applies to my son. So finding out that he was autistic, I wasn't like, well, this is terrible. I was
yeah,
like, what do I do for this
What do I
kid?
do? Yeah, yeah,
Like, if he's acting up, how do I know if it's stimming or if it's him just acting up? How do I know if this is a meltdown or a tantrum? How do I discipline him? Like,
yeah,
do I discipline him for everything? Do like because you don't want to when they have like a meltdown, which I'm sure you've experienced a
yeah,
handful of times at least.
yeah,
You can't really discipline that because that's a
yeah,
sensory overload.
yeah,
They lose control. They hate it as much as you do.
yeah,
It's not a great experience for anybody involved.
yeah.
So you don't discipline that. And then learning how, and it was just an overwhelming experience.
Yes.
Um, learning how to be a parent to my son because like I said before, your parents spend your entire life literally teaching you how to raise children by
Mm,
raising you. And
mm,
when none of those principles apply anymore,
mm,
it's like you're just lost. You're like,
mm. Yeah,
what do I do?
yeah,
So I didn't really see it as like a negative. I just was lost. I felt panicked. I felt alone. I didn't know what to
yeah.
do. I didn't have anyone to talk to about it. I had no one with experience. I had nothing. So I just sat there looking at this kid one day and was like, what do we do, dude? And he's just like, I'm stuck. I'm like, me too, man.
I think, yeah, I think negative is not the right word. It feels like that panic and that overwhelm. Um, if I can, the way that I look at children, even I know you have a particular set of obvious issues to deal with, but I don't think any parent's upbringing now is what you need to base your parenting on. And the reason I say that is because every child these days seems to have access to a mobile phone very early. And the world has changed so much in the last 20 years that your own upbringing is not a good criteria for preparing a child for the world. Because in the next 20 years, given the rate of change we've seen in the last 20 years, how do you prepare children for something, for a future that you don't know? And that's why I have focused on what is core, what is the core need. They need to be they need to have certain skills. They need to be versatile. They need to be um, able to plan and organize and think. All of those are core skills that we all need. And that's where I focus my attention when I'm working with children, because if they're resilient, if they are able to assess a situation, and I know that's a big one for autistic people. I know that risk assessment is not great for them. And you can try driving with my husband for confirmation of that one. But it's it if you look at the core needs, what does a human being, whatever divergence they are, what do they need to be ready for adulthood in this world? Because I think the more divergent people, or the more divergent, the one thing I've learned about children with any difference, any learning difference, and I'm not talking about the small number of um, children who won't be able to function in society. The higher, the more or less obvious, if you like. Um, I think they are the problem solvers. I think they are going to have a lot to offer in terms of solving some of the global issues that we're dealing with right now. So we need to focus on what the core needs are of that child while we cope with the everyday and gradually build towards helping them to to get the best out of their life, because each one has a purpose. I totally believe that. So,
Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense. I 100% agree, and it's a really, I guess you could say introspective way of looking at it, where it's putting more on the adult and less on the child. Where traditionally we put a lot of behavior and thought lines on the child, and then consequences are more their fault, right? So
mm,
it's a nice way to really think about these kids.
mm, mm. Well, I find that with the sensory overload, the job for the adult in the situation is, what is the trigger? Where are the triggers in this situation? And then educate the child about those triggers. So if you put yourself in this situation, you are likely to feel that. If you do that action, you are likely to cause that, because that's what they struggle with. They don't appreciate that they're going to get triggered by, going to a rock concert, or that's the sort of situation that might be completely overwhelming for a person on the spectrum. Or there's certain fabrics, I would run a neurodivergent child. I would take loads and loads and loads and loads of fabrics and colors, and what do you like? What do you not like? So that they learn about themselves and what they want and like by experiencing in small with me or with you, their parent, and they can find out what their triggers are so they can avoid them and just say, no thanks, that's not something I want to deal with, because they're exposed to a world which is in chaos, and they are highly sensitive, intelligent, creative, and reactive. And that's true of all children. But neurodivergent children seem to be more reactive, more sensitive in certain ways and in certain situations. I mean, the noise, ear defenders that you need sometimes for a child who can't tolerate loud noises. So there are situations where you wouldn't take them, or you would warn them, or you would prepare for that situation. And I think that helping the child understand their differences and helping them to build management of those differences so that they can participate as much as possible in a range of situations is the best way to help them. I don't know how you feel about that, but that's the approach I've taken.
Yeah, and just from being in various support groups, and I hear similar stories about triggers and overstimulation and just sensory overload, and like you said, like the things like the headphones and managing the way certain fabrics feel, or the presence of too much of any one color, and things like that are really prevalent. And it's super important, especially if you're dealing with a child on the spectrum who reacts to overstimulation and sensory overload like that with violent outbursts. And there are many of us who have to deal with one that, like, when they have those meltdowns from those triggers, they'll punch, kick, scream, bite, and generally, and just completely lose it. I'm very fortunate where I don't have to deal with that. Mine just yells that he's stuck and then screams nonsense.
Bless him.
And his meltdowns only last like 15 or 20 seconds. So it's almost not even a meltdown, right? It's just a sort of just this quick burst of, I'm getting it out and I'm good. A lot of other parents don't deal with much more extreme versions. So like you said, dealing with that by learning how to prevent those triggers definitely is a super positive way of helping these kids.
Well, also, when there is a meltdown, I remember a parent in a lot of distress with a child who would have regular meltdowns. And actually, while we were talking, her daughter came into the room and demanded something. She wanted attention, and she wanted attention, and she wanted it now. And her father said, "I'm busy. You can't have my attention now." So she went, full eruption. And I walked across to her because the thing that is so draining is when you, as the adult, try to stop that meltdown. And that will wear you out. You won't get anywhere with it, and it will wear you out. But if
Mm-hmm.
you take control, and it looks, people say that, how are you in control? Well, if you are in control of you and you walk across to this child and if you can, if they're not kicking, you can hold them. I held this girl's wrists at the time, and she was in that deep sobbing cry where she couldn't even speak. And she was shaking. And I just gently held her wrist. I wasn't trying to stop her moving or anything. I was just gently holding her wrist. And I was talking in a very slow, calm voice and saying, "It's okay. I'm going to wait until you have control of this. This is the most powerful thing, and I'm going to wait, and it doesn't matter how long it takes. I will wait until you're in charge again." And gradually she brought herself down, and her parents looked at me and said, "We would never have believed that was possible if we hadn't seen it with our own eyes." And when she got herself calm, when she was calm again, I said, "You go and wash your face in cool water and come back." And there's no judgment on it. There's no, this. When you think about it, Christopher, the power of a meltdown, the actual energy involved in that, is a phenomenal force of nature. And for a young child to have to control that is extremely difficult. And if a parent gets involved in that, trying to stop it, they're actually making it worse because they're adding to the power of it. So if
Yep.
you see, and instead of thinking my child's being naughty or my child's in a meltdown and I've got to stop it because everybody else is going to look at us, never mind everybody else. It's just you and your child, and they're in difficulty. And you
Mm-hmm.
need to stay really calm and hold that space for them where they can get to grips with it, because you don't see adults. Yes, you see adults lose their temper, but you don't see adults having those meltdowns from overload. They
Right.
learn.
Right.
They learn.
Yeah. Also, you had mentioned about like weighted blankets and vests and things
Yes. Yeah.
just before this. And recently, my mother bought for my son, it's this product called a Huggimal. And it's a weighted stuffed animal. I think it weighs like 5 pounds or something like that.
Wow.
But if he is in need, because like a lot of times that like sort of like I need my this attention right now, it's their bodies and minds are just starving for certain sensory feedback that it's not getting.
Yeah.
If you're not able to, like, if your hands are full, you're cooking dinner, whatever it is you're doing, you can't give them that sensory feedback that they need. I can actually hand him, and it took him about a week to really get used to having this thing in the house.
Yeah.
um but I can hand him this Huggimal, and just that extra weight that he's
Hug them
holding
all.
it in his arms, it gives him, yeah,
Oh, it
it
sounds
gives him
lovely.
this feedback. I'm sorry, what did you say?
I said it sounds lovely. um,
It's really nice. They're kind of expensive, but I'll tell you what, I'm super grateful to my mom, because we've been on the verge of a meltdown a couple of times where like I'm like bringing groceries in, or we're doing something, he wants me to pick him up. First of all, he's getting too big for that. I almost
yeah.
can't pick him up anymore. I'm just like, dude, take this.
Yeah.
I will be with you in a minute. I need to finish what I'm doing. This ice cream is gonna melt if I don't put it away.
Yeah.
And he takes it, and it just like he gets that sensory feedback he's
Mm.
craving.
Yeah.
And at a minimum, it holds him over
Yeah.
until I'm able to be like, okay, I'm available to you now.
Mm, mm, mm. That sounds lovely. I'm going to look for one of those.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, maybe your husband would like one. They come in all
Yeah.
kinds of different stuff. They like all these animals. He has a sloth. So but yeah, no, they're the weighted items are great.
Have you
Because it gives
seen?
them.
Sorry. Yeah. Have
No,
you
go ahead.
seen have you seen the wobble cushion? Let me show you. Hold on, I just need to get it. This is a wobble cushion, and it's for children who just cannot sit still. And when they sit on this, it's filled with air, and it has these little bumps, and they love it. And they will sit to eat their food, or they will sit in school. Some schools have them, and it helps them because, like you say, it's the sensory feedback that they get from it.
Mm-hmm.
They've got them on Amazon here anyway.
I'll definitely have to take a look at that. That's neat. Fortunately, I don't have too much of a struggle with mine, but I
Yeah,
mean, there are times I could definitely use something like that. In the unfortunate situation, he has to be at like the DMV or something with me.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, that looks. I parents out there try everything, and I know a lot of this stuff is expensive, and a lot of times we don't know
Yeah,
where the money's coming from for this sort of
yeah,
thing, and a lot of
yeah.
us have had to quit our jobs or find new forms of employment that allow us to be present because a lot of times, like, I know here daycare for an autistic child is crazy expensive compared to a neurotypical child. Like, sometimes they charge you as much as double for because all they have to do is change a diaper. It's like
Wow,
fantastic. Yeah,
wow,
and a lot of us get put into these positions where we can't go to a day job anymore because we have to
wow.
make the choice of giving our child what they need, being there and taking care of them, which is our responsibility,
Yeah, yeah,
legally and otherwise,
yeah,
or making money. And it's it's not exactly a fair choice to have to make. It's like, well, I can
no,
feed you or I can be there for you, but I can't do both at all times. And
yeah.
you know, more or less, daycare is a mortgage payment for these
Wow.
neurodivergent kids, and it's difficult to try to figure out. And so, like, we're kind of coming up on time. There is something I do want to ask you. I kind of do want to know, like, for you specifically, from the first time you had to deal with the situation of having a neurodivergent child in your classroom
Mm,
to today, like, what was that experience like? Was it overwhelming at first,
mm,
or did you just kind of like
right.
naturally take to it? Like, walk me through that.
No, it was overwhelming because they're not my children. So I have to be careful because I don't want to cause something that the parent is then going to have to deal with. So I want the children to be able to engage. But I remember I worked with 10 children in one class in a school that was, this was a long time ago, in a school that was they were described as delicate children. So they all had issues. They might be epileptic, or they might be autistic, or they might be have severe health issues. And I had 10 children in my class, and I was not allowed to leave. So I had to have all my breaks with the children. I couldn't leave this class at all. And I didn't have an assistant for some of the time. So it was really hard work. Fortunately, I was still young. So I had energy. But what I found was the thing that at first I didn't want to engage because I had no experience of this. And then I discovered that actually at core, these children are children. They might have other issues, but these are children. They've got really bright spirit. They've got really, we would laugh, we would sing, we would run around the playing field if we could. The children who could and those who couldn't would sit and watch, but they'd be outside. And I found that I wanted to help them after my initial, oh my goodness, how am I going to cope with this? I wanted to help them. And actually, I found I learned a lot from them. I'm not sure what they learned from me, but I learned a lot from them. And I also learned how highly demanding they are on your energy, because they need more support than the average neurotypical child might need. You need eyes in the back of your head, don't you, to keep them safe, because they don't have a sense of danger, always.
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely I just have one and I've experienced that. I can't imagine what having 10 of them is like.
Yeah, exhausting. I said to the head teacher at the end of the week, I said, I've been in there for a week and they call them delicate children. I said, they feel like they're as delicate as stampeding elephants. I'm absolutely worn out. But I,
Yeah.
I, you can bond with these children more because they come to depend on you, and you have to be careful how you handle that bond as a teacher, because they will move on and they will, so I can totally empathize with people who are living with neurodivergent children 24/7.
Honestly, I would never classify my son as delicate. I would classify him as a bulldozer.
Exactly.
Um because sometimes like they do things like if he gets very 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 overwhelmed
Yeah.
or very very upset about something,
Mm.
he will bang his head on stuff, and there has been times where he has busted his stuff open or
Yeah.
bruised himself really really bad. And I know as a parent, the first time he ever did this and I saw this just lump, this bruise, and I'm looking at him like, oh, I'm going to jail. There's no way they're going to believe you did this to yourself,
Yeah.
you know. And
Yeah.
there's that sort of like anxiety just from that,
It
and
is.
learning how to deal with those behaviors or get them to to relax. There are times like he'll go to do it now and I'll just slide my hand and let him bash his head off my hand. Unfortunately, he's kind of grown out of that to a point. Once in a while he still does it, but like these kids, it's almost like they don't feel pain the same way
No.
we do.
Mhm.
Or if they do feel pain, they don't care about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I had a
So
child
yeah, I
in
can't imagine.
I had a child in the class that wore a helmet because he was a headbanger.
Hmm.
And he had a helmet that he had to wear all the time so that it would protect his head. Um, but yeah, I would have places, if you feel really bad, you go in that corner and there's cushions and there's bottles, and you can, if you tie a bottle, the big plastic water bottle, tie a big
Hmm.
plastic
Hmm.
water bottle on the back of a chair or on something, and you can hit that as much as you like. Or you can have a cushion if you want to hit the cushion, or have different areas where they can do that, and you're still controlling that because you're controlling the environment for them and making it safe, where they can do that until they learn not to be that reactive, that they put themselves in danger. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So one more thing before we kind of get towards our closing here. It's something I like to do on every episode, and I feel like maybe you'll have some really great examples because I like to end the conversations on really positive notes. What are like three just phenomenal victories you've seen, like where a child made some incredible improvements that made you feel really good about being in your profession?
Oh, I think I think the little boy that I said I've known. I mean, I don't have much to do with him now. He's at university, but when I met him, the issues where he was eventually diagnosed as gifted and talented, but it looked like autism. He would stride up and down. He couldn't sit still in the classroom. He was diagnosed with dyslexia, with dyspraxia, and working with him to see him then being told actually, because with his mother, we used to argue with the school that he is not autistic. And we were working the whole time to keep him on track and to keep him in school because I believe he's a really clever chap. And when the psychologist saw him and said he should be on the gifted and talented, that was like a triumph. It was like, yes, because these issues, whether they are autism or it's seeing that moment where they get a success. And the other little chap that used to race around the room, thinking it was fantastic because he could go wild. And then it got to, can you stop that, please? And he would stop. The first time he stopped, and you think, wow, he did that. He took control. And seeing them achieve in the school system and feel so proud of themselves, because I think anyone who is learning in a different way is really challenged in the school system. And I always say to the children, whether they're dyslexic, ADHD, or on the spectrum or whatever, if you achieve this, that means you've worked twice as hard as the people who find it straightforward, because you've had to manage all these difficulties along the way. So those children, the different children, are the ones when they achieve something. I love the yes that comes that comes from them as well. And they phone me and say, I got a certificate, I got a certificate. And I think that is fantastic. You know, it's a high five to those children, every little step, and their parents.
That's really gotta feel good when because like if they've remembered you enough to phone you and say, "Hey, I did this," it means that you made enough of an impact on their lives that you were somebody they really wanted to tell about that because they don't function like neurotypical kids where like they do something as, "Hey, mom, dad, look what I did," or show it to a friend. Like they only show off these accomplishments to people who matter to them, who've made that impact.
I think when we teach, well, to be, I mean, from my own point of view, to be a good teacher, you have to engage with the person, not just this is a child, this is Robbie, or this is Daniel, or this is a person. This is a person who I have the privilege of supporting them in part of their journey into life. And this is one of the most challenging times in history to be born. So I take my
Hmm.
hat off to anybody who's dealing with anything that's learning in a different way, or
Yeah.
raising a neurodivergent child. So hats off to you,
Mm.
Christopher, and to all your listeners.
Thanks. I appreciate that. It certainly is a task. Okay, so it's great to hear about that sort of thing, and this little boy who managed to take control, and then the people who call you up to tell you that they've achieved things. It's wonderful because it gives a lot of us hope that like our kids, even though they're not doing something that we think they should be now, that it doesn't mean they'll never do it, right? It
No, no,
just means they need time.
yes.
So it's wonderful to hear about those things. It's a big reason why I like to end conversations with super positive notes like that. But at this point, I'd like to offer you some time. I know you're an author. I'm sure you have some books and programs and websites to promote. So, tell us about that.
Oh, thank you. Well, my latest book is called Making the Pennies Drop. And this is about how it teaches parents about the assessment I use to work out exactly what a child needs. And then it's filled with very simple, straightforward activities to teach self control, like the 1 minute, you have a little 1 minute timer, and you can go mad for 1 minute and stop for it. So it's full of little activities to teach the core skills. And they are activities I've used with neurodivergent children, dyslexic children, ADHD children and neurotypical children, because they address core needs. And so that's my latest book that I published this year. It's called Making the Pennies Drop, and it is on Amazon. And my other two books I mentioned earlier, 100 Things to Learn Before You're 10 and A Short and Simple Book for the Wise, are also on Amazon. And my website is www.lessonsalive.com. I can send the links to you, Christopher. And
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to put them in the description.
yeah, thank you. And yeah, that's me really. I do work with children. I do offer assessments as they've, if people get in touch with me, and I work online. So I do work internationally as well. Yeah.
Fantastic. If they want to get in touch with you directly, is there a way for them to do that, or they just need to go through your website?
They can go through the website, or they can go through, I'm on Facebook. They can message me on Messenger through Facebook, or Instagram. I'm also on Instagram at Lessons Alive.
Awesome. All right. Well, Gail, you know what? I really appreciate you sitting down with me and having this conversation today and taking the time out. I know we had a bit of an entertaining morning with figuring out when we were going to do the conversation.
Yeah, sorry about
that. It's all right. Like I said, yeah, I got an autistic child at home. There's a lot of times where I'm just at home doing nothing except hanging out with him. So, it's easy for me to make time to do stuff like this. It's actually one of the benefits of having an autistic child, where I can't, take him to super crowded places that a lot of other kids like to go to. And I can only I have to master when parks are going to be have a minimum number of children there. And, and this is one of those times of the day. So, like I said, I really appreciate you taking your time and sitting down with me and talking to me about your story, and, just being another person to come on this show to help provide parents a little bit of hope for their kids.
Oh, definitely. There's hope. Definitely. And I'm happy to chat to people. So yeah.
All right. Okay. So everyone, until next time, we are on Twitter at brightspecpod.com. And I think at this point I should have a Discord community up and running. Check the description. If the link's not there, I haven't done it yet. But I'm pretty sure by the time this episode goes up, that'll be a thing. And once again, Gail, thank you so much. And I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you for tuning in to the Brighter Spectrum podcast. If you have any comments, questions, or stories to share, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show, feel free to reach out to me at brighterspectrumpodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care and keep shining a light on the journey of parenting.
Thank you for listening.